There are small moments when you can feel two selves inside you. One of them says, I can't. And they say that a lot. The other one says, of course you can. Yes, you can. The other one will say, stay where it's safe. Don't take any risk. The other one says, step forward into the storm. One reacts from fear, insecurity, old patterns. The other remembers truth and remembers strength and remembers possibility. So the question is not whether there are two voices within you, because there are. The real question is, which one are you allowing to lead? Which one are you listening to? This is a favorite concept of mine, comes from Joseph Murphy. And in The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, that book, he shares the story of the little me and the big me. And that little me is the fearful self, the part that panics and doubts and constricts and tries to take over when things get tough. The big me is the deeper self, the one connected to power, confidence, wisdom, and expression. The teachings of Ashla tell us the lesser self, which is what we call the little self, reacts from fear and limitation. The greater self, which we call the big self, remembers truth. And the work of self-mastery is learning which self is speaking, which self is guiding, and which self has been given the authority. My name is Justin Gates, and you're listening to the new Ashla Podcast. Hello and welcome to the new Ashla Podcast. We're so happy you joined us. No, I didn't forget Michael. I just wanted to give him a big hug today. Michael's with us as always. Hey, buddy.
Hey, buddy. How you doing, fam?
So our core message for this episode today, and I love that concept from Joseph Murphy. I've read everything that I've ever been able to get my hands on from him hundreds of times, probably at this point. I've listened to it hundreds of times at least. And we're going to be talking about the lesser self and the higher self, or in his words, the big me and little me. We're going to be talking about the difference between the two, one being fear-based and one free from those things.
Yeah. No, it's such a powerful topic too. I remember when I was going through my training, when we got to the axiom that surrounds this, which I'm sure will come up in this episode. And I remember diving into this discussion because I'm like, so when do we reach that point of being the higher self? And you were just like, that's not how this works, young Padawan. This is a state which you can learn to harness, to tap into, but we are human. We're stuck in these bodies. We have nervous systems and neural pathways, and it's not a state you should ever strive to become all the time, or you will live a very disappointed life.
You'll be very detached if you're in the higher self too.
Yeah.
Right. You won't want to be here amongst the rest of us, right? It gets very difficult. So we have to dip in from time to time, but let that higher self kind of run some of these systems that we are unfortunately stuck with sometimes. So we're going to look at how that lesser self is shaped by those fears and conditioning and insecurity and ego and survival patterns and all this stuff we talked about before, but we're going to talk about how kind of between the difference of the two, because you and I reference the higher self, lower self a lot, because that's a very important core function of in the path of the philosophy and path of Ashla, becoming aware of those things, right? So the problem here is we have two voices that kind of live within us, you know? We have that, and you can even say it like this: we have a higher self or lower self. We have a truthful self and a shadow self, and we have duality. Duality is a part of the human experience, even though duality isn't real as far as the universe goes, right? But it's something that it's a lens that us humans have: good and bad, light and dark, shadow and light, right? Higher and lesser. So we have these dualities. And if you haven't heard or watched the show on duality we did, Michael, probably a month and a half ago or so,
Yeah, maybe a little longer.
You should listen to that. But so our goal today, one of our goals today, is to all come to an understanding that the inner conflict between these two is not weakness. It may not even exist in reality, in truth, but it doesn't mean it doesn't affect us none the same, right? Nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, and I would say these forces, I mean, they operate on all of us. Whether you follow the path, whether you're in the healing scene, or you're someone who just goes day by day and has no idea of these things, we are all impacted by these systems. One thing that really echoes in my mind as you talk about this is really alignment, right? Because most of us live out of that alignment, and it's learning how to understand these voices is how we can bring them both into alignment. I mean, the higher self is usually right there, but to bring the lower self into that spectrum, to learn how to manage that, I want to say self-talk, but that is such a narrow way to phrase it. This unconscious personality that we have, to bring it into alignment, it takes some real work, takes some real self-awareness.
Right. And that's a good point to establish this whole show on right now. You're not broken. These things are a part of you. The lesser self is no less a part of us than our higher selves. No less a part of us like our bodies, or our brains, or our minds, or our hearts, our emotions. All these things, they are a part of us. And we're not here to destroy them, are we? We're not here to banish them into some hellscape. We're here to align. You said it best. We're here to align. That's one of the keystones of the Ashla philosophy, is to align with, not destroy, not banish, right? And a lot of people do that. But a lot of us do experience this inner division where one part of us wants to grow, but another part wants to stay safe. And that becomes a very big problem, right? Especially as you start onto this path. And this is what shakes a lot of people off the path, wouldn't you say? As we first start walking and first taking these steps, where okay, I'm ready to grow, I'm ready to ascend, I'm ready to do this stuff, and then all of a sudden you're almost betraying yourself, or it feels like betrayal, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, we talk about how we're afraid to take these moves, we're afraid to do these things, but it's much more nuanced than that, because it's all about where has this lesser self cultivated over the years, because it could be very overt, it can be very in people's face, anger outbursts or criticism, or it could be in another area where it is passivity and no follow through, like you were talking about. There's different aspects to how this could mature and grow into a set of coping skills. Mature might not be the best word for it, but the lower self will build itself into whatever structure it needs to be to feel safe. And when you get into the work,
it's not a bad word for it. I think it describes it fine, because a lot of us, and you and I were talking about this the other day offline, and it really does feel like some people that we encounter really are immature spiritually and immature psychologically, right? It does seem that way. I'm not going to point a dirty finger and say, yeah, they are. I don't know for sure, but it seems like it. So I think mature versus immature is a good way of putting this. So let's move to the axiom for this. And I think you'll be able to guess. Let's see if you can guess. Which one are we using for this one? For part one.
It's the one I was quoting in the beginning. It is the responsibility of the greater self to remind the lesser self of the true nature of things.
Yep. Reflect and meditate regularly on this. This is an axiom that all of my students get very early, and it's a heavy one, and it's usually the hardest one for them to unravel at first, right? It probably was for you a little bit. But this axiom introduces us to this inner relationship that we will struggle with. Not just in the beginning of this path or path like Ashla, but when you've been on it for 25 years, you still struggle with this, like I do sometimes. The greater self does not exist to shame or compete or trample upon the lesser self. It exists.
And it never does.
And it doesn't. It's there to guide it. The lesser self is the part of us that becomes tangled in these messes, these fears and identities and attachments and all this stuff. The greater self reminds us, helps us remember a much broader truth, doesn't it? Remember the light.
Well, and I think especially when it comes to remembrance, the higher self will ground us in reality. Like, I realize a lot of this philosophy is grounded in how do we bring people closer to relationship with reality? Because often the lesser self's job, or what it thinks its job is to manage reality from the outside, whether that's making judgments, whether that's trying to shut you down from doing anything that's going to put you in a risky environment. It's constantly trying to manipulate things outside of yourself, when the higher self is like, there is no danger here. Go ahead and try. And even the higher self will see, like, you might fail, but you will learn. The higher self asks of us to expand, and the lesser self often asks us to contract.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. For us, this helps us connect deeply. We talk about connection a lot. And we often talk about connection in regards to relationships. You know, me and you, and me and my dog, and me and whatever. But we can't forget the greatest connection of all, the connection to ourselves, and how we connect to the light, how we connect to creation, how we connect to the universe, right? That one's important too. And the higher selves, the way Joseph Murphy said, the big me exists to connect me to a much deeper place, much higher place than I am, if not only to guide me, not to take over, right? Not to take over, but to guide me to some of these other truths. And it gets tough because, again, the lesser self clings, doesn't it? It just hangs on for dear life to things, and it tries to take over. But one thing I want to say is that we're not talking about beating fear into submission or beating anything into submission. That's what the ego does. The ego will try to beat us into submission if we let it, right? The shadows will beat us into submission if we let them. This is simply about prioritizing our connections and strengthening the ones that are good for us, right?
Yeah.
That
here's a genuine question.
Yeah.
Is when it comes to ego, how closely related is the ego to the lesser self?
Oh, it is the heart of the lesser self. The ego is.
Yes.
Right? It's the heart. And we know what happens if we stop a heart, if we stop right? Things start to die. So we don't want to kill the lesser self. We don't want to, people out there trying to destroy the ego. Well, you're just trying to kill part of yourself. You can't. I've never seen it done. You shouldn't try, because it just gives you more suffering, right? You just suffer more and more and more. But the ego is the heart of the lesser self. But they're still important because they are part of us. They are part of us. I have a question for you as well. Why do people often experience themselves as having these competing inner voices, psychologically speaking? We talk about it metaphysically and spiritually, but how and why is this process happening, up here?
I think when it comes down to it, you have sort of intuition, which sort of tells you should do this, you should take this risk, you should talk to this person, you should show up a certain way. We have this sort of awareness to us of what is the next right action. But we also have the unconscious mind, which is 95% of our thoughts. And when that unconscious mind is talking to us, one thing that kind of blows my mind when you think about that, 95% of your thoughts come from the unconscious, is how many people identify that they are not their thoughts? Because I'm willing to bet you there are hardly any who don't. I think most people think when they think that is who I am, therefore this is how I am, instead of asking themselves, is this something that isn't me? Am I not the person witnessing these thoughts and not the person who is these thoughts?
Right, because we are not our thoughts. They are a part of us, but we are not. Just like I'm not this house that I'm sitting in. I'm inside the house, but I'm not the house. Right? I have a leg, but I'm not my leg. I am my fingers, but I'm not my fingers, because I can lose my fingers and still be me. Right? will take anything away from me by removing, deducting things from my life. I'm still me. I might be suffering a little more and I might not be very happy about it, but I'm still me. At the end of the day, I'm still me. But identifying with is one of the hardest things to climb. It's one of the biggest breakthroughs we have with people that we're trying to heal, right? We're trying to help. It is the identifying with, and that's, you hit the nail on the head. That is one of the biggest things that keeps us down, is identifying with stuff that may not even be true. And that's the problem, right? And this is, the philosophy of Ashla and my teachings were never meant or designed. They were never designed to be a tool for healing. But God, it turned out to be, because they do bring us into truth. They do bring us into alignment. They do bring us, make us whole again. They bring us into authenticity. Yeah. They bring us into this space where we can heal. So, yeah. So
one thing I think about often is one of the lessons you gave me when we first started working together. You'd always give me different meditations, breathing exercises, and I'm going to butcher the verbiage, but the heart is the same because I do this practice a lot. And it's when I'm really getting in my head about things, I'll sit there and I'll meditate, and as thoughts come up, I'll ask, is this me? And then as I sit with it, it's like, no, this is not me. And then it goes into a deeper thought. Is this me? And slowly, as you go deeper and deeper, you realize these thoughts are experiences trying to tell me stories. And you get closer to becoming the observer again, where you notice all the stories, all the friction, all the things going on in your mind are exactly that. They're mental noise.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I hope you never stress about trying to do my things perfectly or try to remember the axioms perfectly, because you can't. I can't, right? Just be present with them. Presence over perfection. That's what's most important. If you can tell me about an axiom, you can't remember a damn word of an axiom, but you can tell me about an axiom, that's better. That's even actually better than reciting the axiom to me, right? Because I'm like, they understand it. I don't care if they can say it perfectly. All right. I don't care. Because if you could tell me about it and how, especially if you tell me in a way how it relates to you, right? Especially the axioms that become a medicine for you. If you can explain that to me, that's way better, 100,000 times better than just reciting, a line in my book or a line in my teachings, right? 100%. So I love that. So how does this show up for us, right? The easy answer is, well, the lesser self is kind of fear-based, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of an easy way to say it. But let's talk about a little bit about how this shows up so that all of us can be better aware, because awareness is power, right?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I reflect on often is it's just like when I'm in a situation is like, am I searching for control or power? Or am I seeking to understand and be involved, right?
Right.
It's like looking at things where, am I coming from a place of authenticity? Or is this me trying to have bravado? Is this me trying to strut my stuff or feel better than others? Which, for me, being accepted. Yeah. That's better. I like that more. Because it's like, I'm not someone who feels like I ever need to be better than anyone, but there are times where that little voice in my mind is like, you need to show that you're knowledgeable and that you're credible, and that you need to approach things from this angle in order to get that validation. And one of the beautiful things with this work is, like, as I've been getting out there and meeting people, it's not trying to present myself as someone who has all this wisdom and all this knowledge and all this experience that gets me into good conversations. It is being genuinely curious and just myself. Half the time, I never even need to talk about my work. The conversation tells the story it needs to.
Right. No, that's good. That's how we start to notice it, because, we will, because we're creatures of habit and pattern, and we fall into these patterns. And a lot of the stuff we talk about on many of the topics that we do here, we talk about, well, how does it show up? Well, it shows up a lot in the same ways, right? For example, if you're saying I can't a lot, when you're not even sure, right? or you find yourself expecting to fail, or you assume you're going to be rejected without even taking any steps to even know for sure. So my question is it real? It's not real. It's not real until you test that, right? Until you test it. But I want to be clear, that doesn't make it evil. It's just afraid. And afraid we can work on, right? We can work past afraid, because we're all afraid of something, or we're afraid of something at some point, and we work through it. If you're out there listening and this stuff feels like you, well, guess what? You've worked through some I'm afraids too on other things. So, this is no different. We can work on this stuff. These are the parts that are shaped by your wounds and your conditioning and all these things that we talk about all the time, or old stories, right? That you identify with, and they're not even about you. They're about someone else. They're about a made up person that's not you. Right. Yeah. So,
well, I think an important thing to stress about this too is this is sort of something I've been sitting with a lot lately. You were talking about earlier about sort of how there is no dichotomy when it comes to light and dark, when it comes to good and bad, how these things don't exist, and there's truth in that. And then it's like, when we talk about learning to listen to the higher self, it does not mean you are now not going to worry. It does not mean you're not going to still feel like you're going to fail. It is being able to act despite those feelings. Yeah. Because now you have clarity. And that's something that I've been sitting with a lot lately when it comes to ego, is like, a lot of the actions I've taken in my life, I have judged myself for, because I feel like they boast pride. They could come across as hurtful or causing others pain. And it's being able to measure these things and realize that some things do feed our ego, and that is not a bad thing. Ask yourself, what is the point of the work you're doing? The best example I got, because this is where I started really starting to notice this, was I used to throw parties all the time. Back in the day, I loved bringing people together, having people meet people they've never met before, and I loved the networking. There was a lot of admiration I got for that. There was a lot of respect I got for that. But that was never why I did it.
Right.
And I would judge myself for that, because I would enjoy that. And I'd be like, look at you. You're so full of pride. You're so, you feel so high up, and that's not acceptable. And it's like, no, the whole point of that was I love bringing people together, having that shared mission, breaking bread together. And those were just part of the benefits. There is nothing wrong with your ego feeling nourished from your work, as long as your ego is not what's trying to drive the mechanisms. Mm-hmm. Which sometimes it will. Again, it's not the absence of, but it's being able to come from a place of clarity and honesty while having those things come up.
Right. Yeah. And the big me, or the higher self, it's not in competition with the lower self. It understands that it exists to coexist, to align with, right? It understands its mission. And so the real issue here is not that the lower self exists. It does. It needs to. It has to. We're here for a reason, right? We have to suffer and go through these hard lessons, because most of us listen to our ego and we're hard-headed, and we just aren't going to go the easy way. And there's nothing wrong with that either. That's very natural for human beings, right? It's a very real thing for us. But so the real issue is not that lower self exists. It has to. It will speak. It will speak from fear, or it will speak from false authority, right? Yeah. If it speaks from these old patterns. But the real question is whether those voices have authority. And they don't. You have authority, right? Because you are both. You are both the higher self and the lower self. You are both.
Yes. And you always will be.
And you always will be. As far as I know, until at least you die. And then after that, I guess, we'll have to do our podcast from the ether, from the afterlife, and then we'll know for sure, right, Michael?
Technology will be far enough by then.
So, yeah. The axiom that I chose for this section is, when darkness is upon you, be mindful. Its power can influence thought, motive, and deed. Remain calm and patient, as light will always guide you from despair. And this axiom is here because the little me does not only create fear as a feeling, or at least operate from it. When it's allowed to lead, when we allow only half ourselves to lead, fear begins influencing thought, motive, deed. It affects everything about us, how we think, what we believe, the actions we take, right? It affects what we avoid. Like not only does it affect what we do, Michael, but it affects what we hide from and what we avoid too. Yeah. Right? It affects the stories and the meaning we give things too.
Yeah. You know, you were just talking earlier about how you love when an axiom really sits with someone, where it really gets into them. This was one of those axioms. This was probably the number one axiom that like hit me at my core through the course of our training, because I was going through the dark night. I was going through this whole destruction of who I was, not because of the training, but because everything I had gone through had brought me to my knees. And it was this axiom that made me realize, especially in those moments when the rumination would come up, when the trauma would be pressing in, when the grief was heightened, how much that it could just penetrate through thought, through self-esteem, through worth, through your actions, through your convictions, through everything. And it made me realize how much you must never let go of the light in times of darkness, how you must always be mindful of the things you choose to entertain in your own mind when it comes to these stories. Because you were talking earlier about how like some people end up never trying again. Well, that's when the story becomes scripture inside us, right?
Yeah. And it's very important. This stuff matters, especially the alignment. And I'm going to remind us again, because there are going to be folks out there that's going to hear this kind of teaching and start attacking the shit out of their egos and attacking the shit out of their fearful lower part of themselves. But does hatred create harmony?
No. If anything, it just makes it worse. That which you resist shall persist.
It will grow that shadow. Inner violence does not create self-mastery. It does not. So
one thing I got to say about this topic that's really important, because I know that some of the listeners are thinking about this. When I first heard the axiom about the higher self and the lower self, I kind of took a mission upon myself to start understanding the difference between instinct and insecurity, intuition and insecurity. And I spent so much time reflecting on this, getting in touch with the higher self. And for those of you listening that are looking for the answer to that, I'm going to be blunt. There is no getting to the point where your intuition will override insecurity. It is being able to have both exist and being able to trust yourself enough to make the right decision. And that takes time, practice, and cultivated experience within yourself. Because in times of crisis, your intuition might try to talk to you, but your insecurities, like you said, will try to pretend authority.
Yeah. Right. What we need to find is harmony. That's what Ashla is. Now, this doesn't mean that every inner part of you on the inside, that every part feels the same thing or agrees. It means that the higher part of you leads the whole in tangent with the lower self. So the higher self, lower self helps lead together in tangent, right, with each other, right? Because the lower self is what does. It pushes us. It's what moves us. Yeah, we need action. We need movement. We need things to push us. Even fear sometimes can be a good thing to get us motivated and moving. But the higher self is what guides us. So this is what like a conversation would be. The lesser self would say, "Dude, I'm afraid," but the higher self would say, "I hear you. I hear you. It's okay. It's natural to be scared of this thing that we're dealing with, right?" The lesser, you should be scared of this a little bit, right? That helps us move wisely, right? The lesser self would say, "Nope, I'm not moving. This is crazy. I'm safer over here. I'm not moving." The higher self will say, "Well, look, we'll move wisely. Let's just move wisely and strategically. Let's take one step at a time." The lesser self will say, "Dude, we're not safe here. This is all crazy. We're not safe." The greater self would then say, well, hey, let's sit with this for a minute and discern what is actually true about this and what's not true. Right? Fear will always have a part of a conversation for human beings, but it does not need to lead anything. So let me ask you a question. When that fear-based part of us is allowed to make decisions, you know, what kinds of things can happen to us? You know, how does a survival strategy become the voice that starts running someone's whole life?
Oh, man, I think there's so many people that have this affliction, and there are so many, like I said earlier, there's so many paradigms in which this can operate from. You may be someone who burns bridges the minute someone says something you don't like. You could be someone who shies away from any meaningful step that could change your life, or that is afraid of doing the hard thing, whether that's leaving a relationship or a bad job, or just going into school or moving across the country. It's the lower self, when it is in control, which I feel for most people it is, it will always try to have you operate from the lowest level of your training, right?
Yeah.
It'll always want you to it'll always make you want to act in alignment with what has always served you instead of what could make you greater than you currently are.
Yeah. So, well, let's get into how we can start changing that. Right? Let's talk about some first steps into this more whole being, a self that's led by both in tangent, in alignment with each other. One thing we need to make sure we're doing is that, yes, the greater self sounds like something that must be worshipped or admired, right? It's not. It's something we need to practice. Right? It doesn't, and at the heart of the greater self is not an ego. It doesn't care. It does not care if it doesn't, care. It does not care, right? It's that part of us that is super humble, right? Just wants everybody to get along, wants all the parts to be whole and have integrity, right? So it's not enough to just like the idea, love the idea of the higher self. It's not enough just to say, hey, I want to be guided by the lights. You know, we can say that, but we have to practice things. It has to become a discipline for us. And this is really what sets Ashla apart in a lot of ways. Something that I see in others when we talk about our philosophy, or we're out there demonstrating. You and I had a conversation about a time where you were recently out demonstrating. You were out there teaching and demonstrating some teachings, and something came up where it was like, you know, you're like, as you said to me, you're like, dude, when I'm doing this out there, I feel like I'm a monk. You know, yeah. I feel like he raised me in a monastery my whole life, right? That's because it's not enough for us to just say we want to do these things, right? We must practice. We must make these practices into disciplines. That's why it felt like that. And the more you teach this, and the more you're out there amongst our peers and amongst people seeking healing, you're going to see it. You're going to be like, damn, Justin actually had me. I was a prisoner in his monastery. It's going to feel like that because we can't just say we want things, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was a crazy experience because I realized in a moment where I was teaching and doing these things that it's like old me would be so activated right now. And it's not that the mechanisms didn't come online, but the awareness was strong enough to be in the moment, stay present with it, but also stay in my power. I mean, this cultivation, again, practice is the most important thing. One thing that keeps echoing in my mind as we've been going through this episode is you can't meet anyone deeper than they've met themselves.
That's right.
And there is so much truth to this, even with ourselves. And unfortunately, we're never going to be able to gauge how deeply we've met ourselves because we're always at the bottom of that well, right? Mm-hmm. But self-awareness is your greatest skill you can have going into this, and radical honesty. And that doesn't mean judging or blaming. It just means being honest about what is really coming up here. Am I scared because of past rejections or because this is an actual threat? Am
Right.
I wanting to blow up because that is what makes it where I don't have to deal with this right now? Or is it because I've genuinely been affronted and that my pride is being called in right now?
Yes, we must learn to be curious and then affirmative, right? We have to ask better questions first. Like you said, is this actually happening to me? And if we discover that it's not, honestly, then we need to say, I am more than this, or I am guided by truth. Whatever kind of affirmation that you can come up with that stands against or erects a boundary away from this falsity, this lie. Because the greatest lie ever told is the lie we tell ourselves. And it's easy for us to believe the lies we tell, right? It's just we believe ourselves more than we believe others. That's just how it is. So, yes, 100%. Be curious and then be affirmative. If the situation actually is, then get the hell out of there, right? If it actually is. But honestly, the majority of the time, it's not. We're coming from old stuff. We're coming from old stories, right? We're being absolutely too proactive because we're using what happens instead of having boundaries to protect us from those stories and those old things.
Yeah.
But we have to embody this stuff through action, don't we?
Yeah, we have to. I think one of the most important things, and this is something that you can really carry out there with this, is lean into the uncomfortable thing. If you're someone who explodes, bite your tongue. It'll be uncomfortable. There will be plenty you want to say, but learn to bite your tongue. And again, it's learning what the next step is in managing and learning how to get this all more in alignment. If you're someone who's passive, learn to say the hard thing. And you don't have to start large, but start where you notice yourself start to shrink. Lean into what is uncomfortable, because often the thing that feels most comfortable is the response we always have.
Yeah. Yep. On this path, in the Ashla philosophy, we train our luminari, which are our students, our knights, our masters. We call them luminari. They carry the light. We train ourselves to not wait for the greater self to just appear in crisis or when things have gone crazy. We practice it daily. We cultivate it daily so that when that fear starts to come or those old patterns start to resurface, we already know what voice to trust. And this is where the emotion yet peace line in our code becomes very practical for us. Emotions rise like the waves, like the water. They rise and fall sometimes. Fear, we will speak through fear. Old patterns will, like I said, come up and reach for control. They'll try to take the wheel. But if we can find peace quickly, or in Michael's world, regulation, right? That will govern the response, right? For me, it's the peace. For him, it's regulation. They're the same thing. If you can find those things, then you can say, fear, go sit the fuck down.
Yeah.
Go sit down. I hear you. Sit down. Right? We can start to manage these things. We could be the ultimate bus driver of ourselves, right? We could just sit the troublemakers down, tell them to shut up and eat their sandwich or whatever they're doing back there. and we're in charge. I'm driving this bus, right?
Yeah. I think a good way to phrase this too, because like we said earlier, I mean, it's not that these things are just gone, that we get rid of them, but it's how much agency do these mechanisms have over your current state? How much agency do these limiting beliefs, these stories that try to weave themselves into your situations, how much agency do they have in your own reality? Because when you can be the master of your own reality, it doesn't mean they don't come up. It doesn't mean you don't have the thoughts. But you're no longer allowing the thoughts to define who you are in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Do you have any final thoughts for the show today before we close out?
Like all our teachings, this is not something that now that you understand it, you're going to be magically cured. Practice is very emphasized for this, because the more in relationship you get with yourself, the more aware you become of how you operate as a human and all the little mechanisms you've learned to cultivate, the more you will be able to strategize and catch things when they arise before they become something that takes over who you are in that moment, like they always have. So start small, start finding those moments of awareness, and then finding little steps you can take in your life to start gaining gaining agency back in your life.
Well said. Speaking of practices, today, as always, we have a practical exercise for you. This is a dialogue between the big me and the little me. And we're going to take about 10 minutes. It should take about 10 minutes. You can spend more time with it, but please don't spend any less time than 10 minutes. 10 minutes is a good amount of time for this. And we're going to take 10 minutes with the journal. Of course, Justin's always about his journals. Yes. So step one, we're going to write down one situation where fear, doubt, or insecurity has been loud, has been screaming in your ear, pushing you and forcing you into something. I want you to write down one situation. Step two is to give a voice to the little me or to the lesser self. I want you to imagine what the little me or little self would be writing. And I want you to write what it is saying without judging it. Of course, all these exercises are going to bring things to the surface that we don't want to judge, right? Because we don't want fear. We don't want shame or blame, right, Michael? We want to just observe. For example, this is stuff that the little me or the lesser self may say. I'm afraid I'll fail, or I'm not ready, or they'll reject me. They don't like me. I can't handle this, things like that. Now, whatever the little me said, step three is to ask, well, what is this part trying to protect? Not what is this part trying to say to me, or what is this part trying to control in me? We want to know what this part is trying to protect you from. Step four. Now it's time to let the big brother, the big me, the greater self respond. And I want you to write from its perspective, from their perspective. And some examples. They may say, I understand there's fear, but we are not ruled by it. Or we can take the next right step. Or, hey, man, we survived this before. We've survived many things before. We can grow now. Those are just some examples. Yeah, you're not gone yet, right? So step 5 is to choose one action that lets that greater self kind of guide us and lead us. Not just a thought or not just a sentence. We want an action, an act, something that we can do, something we can act on. So that is our exercise for today. Our affirmations for this episode. I recognize the voice of fear without surrendering any authority to it. My greater self remembers truth when my lesser self forgets. I am not ruled by the little me. I am guided by the truth within me. Fear may speak, but wisdom always leads. I allow the greater self to guide my thoughts, my words, and my actions. And our bonus journal prompts for today, for you go-getters. Where does my little me speak the loudest? In other words, what kinds of situations does that person, that part of you trigger out the most? What fear-based story has been trying to lead my life? What is my lesser self trying to protect me from? That one straight from the exercise. What would my greater self say in response? What action would prove the greater self is leading? So look, there will always be moments, especially once you become aware of it, where you're going to see the little me or the lesser self speaking. We're all of us will speak from fear from time to time, even those of us who are quote unquote healed, right? That wounded self, that conditioned self, the parts of us that says, I can't, I'm not ready, or I'll fail, or I'm not enough. Do not try to beat that part up. Do not hate that part. Do not try to eradicate that part or banish it, because you can't. You can't. the work here is not to destroy that part of us. The work is to bring it into right relationship with the rest of us, especially the greater self. To learn to let wisdom lead and not fear. To let truth help us dispel insecurity. And I want to point this out. The big me is not arrogance. It's not spiritual arrogance. It's not ego, as we said. It's that deeper self that's aligned with these things like truth and courage, faith, the force, creation, God. It's the part of us that remembers everything, the parts we can't remember, which is why we're in trouble all the time, right, Michael?
Yeah.
But it's the part that remembers all the stuff that we did before that we don't remember, because we have to learn some more stuff here now. And, the law of confusion, it's great, but sometimes it sucks, right? Even for those of us who teach. So as you move forward from this episode, I want you to start being more curious and then affirmative. You start asking better questions. Ask yourself things like, which self is speaking right now? Which self am I feeding? Right?
Yeah.
Which self am I letting lead the way? And the answer should be both, once they're aligned. Not one or the other, because they both have important functions. So if this episode resonated with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe and do all the social media stuff. It really does help us. It helps build a following. It helps us reach more people. And you can follow us at Facebook and YouTube and Spotify. Those are probably
Instagram, TikTok, we're all over.
Instagram. Yep. And those are good places to follow us. It takes like less than a second to click follow. Certainly to click like. It may take a couple extra seconds to hit share, but it really, really, really does help us out. And it's free. Right? It helps let us know that the work we're doing is resonating, because Michael and I are constantly trying to get better every episode. So we read your comments, we look at the analytics and we go, okay, maybe we needed to do a little something here. If you've been a long time listener, you know that you'll see changes. Like every 4 or 5 shows, you might see a new thing or something different, right? That's because we're taking all that input, we're taking all of your stuff and it's going, okay, maybe we should do this better because it's not resonating here. So please do that. All of us have someone in our life that could use this episode today. So if you could think of someone, share it with them, right? Or share it on your feed in hopes that they find this. Because I know it can be kind of daunting to send somebody a episode like this without feeling like you're calling them out. So, I mean, just share it on your page. People might secretly go click it. And that's what we find a lot on the show is people will secretly find and listen to our stuff because maybe they do feel ashamed, which they shouldn't. But anyways, but these teachings help return people to awareness and help them in their lives. So,
and if this episode resonated with you, there's an episode guide right below this. Yep. Download it. It'll help you work through this. It'll give you a whole week of work. And if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get an even longer version of that'll really help you pick this apart and really give you stuff to think about as you reflect on your own journey.
Yep. We love you guys so very much. We couldn't do this without you. We do this for you. And so thank you for showing up every week. There's a core number of you that show up strong every week, and we love you guys so much. We really do appreciate it. With that being said, until next time, with love and gratitude, ad lucem.
Ad lucem.